Have you ever wondered why certain prophecies about the papacy have been kept hidden from the public eye? What if I told you that ancient predictions point to our current era as the time of the final pope? The Vatican's most closely guarded secrets might reveal a timeline that's rapidly approaching its conclusion, and most believers have no idea what's coming. The last shepherd will guide his flock through the valley of darkness before the mountains crumble and the seas rise. Attributed to the Codex Vaticanus Latinus 3968. Throughout history, mysterious prophecies have emerged about the succession of popes and the eventual end of the papacy as we know it. These predictions span centuries and come from various sources, some officially recognized by the Church, others intentionally obscured. Today, we're going to explore these prophecies, their origins, and why they might be more relevant now than ever before. The most famous papal prophecy comes from Saint Malachy, a 12th century Irish bishop. During a visit to Rome in 1139, Malachy reportedly experienced a vision showing him all future popes until the end of time. He described 112 popes with brief Latin phrases, or mottos, that would somehow characterize each pope's reign. According to this prophecy, Pope Francis would be the 112th and final pope before a significant transformation of the Church and possibly the world. Malachy's text concludes with a chilling description. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people, the end. This apocalyptic ending has fueled speculation about whether Pope Francis truly represents this final figure, or if another pope will follow. What's particularly fascinating about Malachy's prophecies is their apparent accuracy. For example, Pope Pius VI, 1775 to 1799, was described as Peregrinus Apostolicus, apostolic pilgrim, and indeed he was forced to leave Rome as a prisoner and died in exile. Pope John Paul II was characterized as de laboris solis, from the labor of the sun, and he was born during a solar eclipse and was entombed on the day of a solar eclipse. But there's more to these prophecies than just Malachy's vision. Lesser-known predictions from Nostradamus also point to our current era as a pivotal time for the Catholic Church. In Century 2, Quatrain 41, he wrote, "The great star will burn for 7 days. The cloud will cause 2 suns to appear. The big mastiff will howl all night when the great pontiff changes country." Some scholars interpret this as referring to a major change in the papacy, perhaps even the relocation of the papacy from Rome. The resignation of Pope Benedict XVI in 2013 was particularly significant because it was the first papal resignation in nearly 600 years. This unexpected break from tradition aligned with another ancient prophecy from the Benedictine monk, Blessed Tomasuccio de Foligno, died 1377. "Woe to the world! The people shall be oppressed by tyrants, and the church shall be under attack. One who was considered dead shall rise again from his tomb, and will lay down his life for the church. The schisms shall cease, and all will obey the one Lord sent by God." Could this one who was considered dead refer to a future development in the papacy? What makes these prophecies even more compelling is how they intersect with biblical prophecies, particularly from the book of Revelation. Revelation 17 speaks of a woman sitting on 7 hills, traditionally identified as Rome, and describes the fall of Babylon the Great. Some interpretations suggest this could represent a dramatic change or fall of Rome and the Vatican. There's also the prophecy of the 3 days of darkness, which appears in various Catholic mystical traditions. Sister Elena Aiello, an Italian nun and mystic who died in 1961, reported visions of a coming punishment. Russia will march upon all the nations of Europe, particularly Italy. and will raise her flag over the dome of St. Peter's. Italy will be severely tried by a great revolution. The world will be once more afflicted with wars, fire, famine, and death, but a darkness will cover the earth for 3 days, and on the 3rd day all the enemies of the Church will perish. Most mainstream Catholic authorities distance themselves from these prophecies, considering them either misinterpreted or apocryphal. The Vatican officially dismisses the prophecy of the popes attributed to Malachy as a forgery created during the late 16th century. However, this official position hasn't stopped many faithful from finding correlations between the prophecies and actual events. Adding to the mystique are the secrets of Fatima. In 1917, 3 shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal, claimed to have received visions from the Virgin Mary, including 3 secrets. The 3rd secret was only revealed in 2000 and involved the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. However, many believe this wasn't the complete secret, and that the Vatican is still withholding information that may pertain to the end of the papacy. What's particularly intriguing is how these prophecies converge with current events. Pope Francis has instituted significant reforms and exhibited unconventional approaches to papal leadership. His focus on environmental issues, economic inequality, and more relaxed stances on certain doctrines has caused both admiration and controversy. Could his papacy be fulfilling these ancient predictions of a transformative final pope? The year 2025 is particularly significant as it will be a jubilee year in the Catholic Church, a special year of remission of sins and universal pardon. Pope Francis has declared it the Jubilee of Hope. Throughout history, Jubilee years have often coincided with significant events in the Church. Could this upcoming Jubilee mark a pivotal moment in papal history as prophesied? Many scholars point to Pope Francis's choice of name as significant. No previous pope had taken the name Francis, which honors Saint Francis of Assisi. According to legend, Saint Francis received a divine commission to rebuild my church. Is Pope Francis fulfilling this mission at a critical juncture in church history? There's also the matter of Pope Francis's age. At 88 years old in 2025, he's already one of the oldest serving popes in history. The convergence of his advanced age with these ancient prophecies adds another layer of urgency to the speculation about what might come next for the Catholic Church. Beyond Catholic prophecies, there are interesting parallels in other religious traditions. Islamic eschatology speaks of signs preceding the end times, including moral decay and religious corruption. Jewish mystical traditions contain prophecies about a time of global transformation. The Hopi Native American prophecies speak of a great purification that would bring about a new world. The convergence of these diverse traditions pointing to our current era is remarkable. As we delve deeper into these prophecies, we must ask, why have these predictions been kept relatively obscure? Is there a reason certain elements of these prophecies aren't widely discussed in mainstream religious education? What might the implications be if we're truly witnessing the era of the final pope? The connection between papal prophecies and biblical events runs deeper than most realize. While skeptics dismiss these predictions as coincidence, the mathematical probability of so many specific details aligning by chance is extraordinarily small. Let's examine the numerical patterns that appear across these prophecies. In biblical numerology, the number 7 represents completion or perfection. Interestingly, Pope Francis is the first Jesuit pope in history, and his birth name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, contains exactly 7 syllables. He was elected on the 13th day of March 2013, a date that forms a pattern of 13-313 when abbreviated. In biblical symbolism, 13 often represents rebellion or apostasy. Is this mere coincidence or divine design? Furthermore, Pope Francis was elected on the second day of the conclave, received 77 votes on the fifth ballot, and chose the name Francis the Faistus, which consists of 2 words and 9 letters, adding to 11, which in biblical numerology often represents disorder or judgment. These numerical coincidences have led some scholars to see patterns that align with ancient predictions. The prophecy of the popes isn't the only prediction that seems to align with recent papal history. Mother Marianne de Jesus Torres in 17th century Ecuador received visions about a time when the church will go through a dark night for lack of a prelate and father to watch over it with love, gentleness, strength, and prudence. Some interpret this as referring to the period following Benedict XV's resignation. Sister Lucia dos Santos, one of the 3 Fatima visionaries, reportedly wrote in correspondence with Cardinal Carlo Caffarra, "The final battle between the Lord and the reign of Satan will be about marriage and the family." Pope Francis's papacy has indeed been marked by intense debates about family issues, particularly through the controversial synods on the family in 2014, 2015, and their aftermath. What's particularly striking is how many of these prophecies converge on our specific time period. The 16th century prophet Nostradamus wrote in Century 5, Quatrain 49, "Not from Spain, but from ancient France, will be elected for the trembling ship, the Church. He will make a promise to the enemy, who will cause great plague during his reign." Some scholars connect this with Pope Francis's Jesuit background, as the Jesuits were founded by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who was indeed not Spanish by birth, but from what was historically considered part of France. Beyond Catholic prophecies, Jewish mystical tradition in the Zohar predicted that around this time period, the gates of wisdom will be opened above and the fountains of wisdom below, and the world will be prepared to enter the 7th millennium, which some interpret as the Messianic age. The convergence of these predictions from different faith traditions adds another layer of significance. The Book of Revelation describes 7 churches in Asia Minor, which some biblical scholars interpret as representing 7 ages of the church. If this interpretation is accurate, we would now be in the final church age, that of Laodicea, described as lukewarm and in need of renewal. This corresponds with many modern prophetic voices who call for a purification of the church. Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and alleged inventor of the chronovisor, a device he claimed could view events from the past, reportedly stated before his death in 1994 that he had witnessed future events showing a significant transformation of the papacy in the early 21st century. According to witness accounts, he predicted a pope who would change everything, but faced tremendous opposition. Prophecies about papal succession often coincide with astronomical events. The motto assigned to Pope Francis in the Prophecy of the Popes is Peter the Roman, or according to some interpretations, Glory of the Olive, transferred from Benedict XVI. Interestingly, during Francis's papacy, we've witnessed rare celestial phenomena, including a sequence of 4 total lunar eclipses, blood moons, that coincided exactly with Jewish feast days in 2014-2015, an event astronomers calculate happens only once every 300 years. The 2015 solar eclipse that traversed the North Pole on the spring equinox, a phenomenon that won't recur for another 500,000 years, occurred during Francis's papacy and precisely on the midpoint of the tetrad of blood moons. Ancient prophecies often connected celestial signs with major shifts in religious authority. There's also the prophecy of Saint Francis of Assisi himself, who reportedly declared, "At the time of this tribulation, a man, not canonically elected, will be raised to the pontificate, who by his cunning will draw many into error. Some preachers will keep silence about the truth, and others will trample it underfoot and deny it. The sanctity of life will be held in derision even by those who outwardly profess it. For in those days, Christ will send them not a true pastor but a destroyer. This prophecy has led some traditionalist Catholics to question whether Francis's election was valid, given the unprecedented resignation of Benedict XVI that preceded it. The phrase "not canonically elected" has sparked debates about the conclave process and whether external pressures influence the outcome. Another startling connection involves the prophecies of Our Lady of La Salette, recognized by the Catholic Church in 1851. Melanie Calvat, one of the visionaries, received messages including, "Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. The Church will be in eclipse, the world will be in dismay." While these dire predictions were controversial enough that the Vatican attempted to suppress their full publication, they've persisted in Catholic prophetic literature. Venerable Archbishop Fulton Sheen, a prominent American Catholic figure, predicted in 1948, "The false prophet will have a religion without a cross, a religion without a world to come, a religion to destroy religions. There will be a counterfeit church. Christ's church will be one, and the false prophet will create the other." Many see parallels between these warnings and current theological debates within Catholicism. The timing of these prophecies becomes even more intriguing when considering cyclical patterns in church history. Major church councils typically trigger periods of significant change, often lasting approximately 50 to 60 years. The Second Vatican Council concluded in 1965, and 60 years later brings us to 2025, the very Jubilee year declared by Pope Francis. Archaeological discoveries also provide surprising connections. In 2013, just as Pope Francis began his papacy, archaeologists uncovered what they believe to be the oldest known image of St. Peter in Rome, dated to the 4th century. The timing of this discovery, coinciding with the potential Peter the Roman prophecy, struck many as significant. Historical patterns suggest that major religious shifts often occur during periods of global instability. The current convergence of global challenges, climate concerns, geopolitical tensions, technological disruption, and pandemic recovery mirrors conditions that have historically preceded religious transformations. What makes the current period particularly unique is the unprecedented access to information. For the first time in history, billions of people can instantaneously learn about prophecies that were once known only to select scholars. This democratization of prophetic knowledge itself fulfills ancient predictions about the end times, when knowledge will increase, Daniel 12:4. The Vatican's own astronomical observatory has noted unusual solar activity predicted for the coming years. Solar maxima, periods of intense solar activity, can affect Earth's magnetosphere and have historically coincided with periods of social upheaval. The next solar maximum is expected around 2025, aligning precisely with the Jubilee year. While mainstream theological scholars often dismiss these connections as coincidental, the mathematical probability of so many convergences happening by chance is exceedingly small. Using basic probability calculations, the odds of even 10 specific prophecies aligning with current events is less than 1 in a trillion. What if these prophecies aren't just about the end of the papacy, but about a transformation of spiritual leadership more broadly? Many mystical traditions speak of a coming age of the Spirit, when institutional religions will undergo profound changes to reveal deeper spiritual truths that have been obscured by centuries of tradition and dogma. Among the most compelling aspects of these prophecies is their cross-cultural nature. Native American traditions speak of a time when a white prophet would come from the East to help usher in a new spiritual age. The Hopi specifically mention a time when those of spiritual authority would be tested, and only those serving with pure hearts would continue to lead. Eastern Orthodox prophecies, particularly from elders of Mount Athos, have long predicted a time when Rome would undergo significant changes. Elder Paisios, 1924-1994, stated, "The Pope will visit Jerusalem. These events will happen when the Pope and Patriarch will go to Jerusalem and, as the Church Fathers say, together they will preach that Christ is coming so that the Jews will believe." Interestingly, Pope Francis and Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I did meet in Jerusalem in 2014, marking the 50th anniversary of the historic meeting between Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras. This fulfillment of Elder Paisios' prediction has gone largely unnoticed by Western media, but was recognized within Orthodox circles. As we examine these prophecies in relation to current events, we must ask what might be the ultimate purpose behind these predicted changes. If we are indeed witnessing the era of the final Pope as traditionally understood, what comes next? A complete collapse of religious authority, or perhaps a transformation into something entirely new? The implications extend beyond the Catholic Church to all religious and spiritual traditions. Many spiritual teachers across various faiths speak of an impending great awakening that will transcend denominational boundaries. Could the prophecies about the final Pope be pointing toward this larger spiritual evolution? In the next section, we'll explore how these prophecies relate specifically to geopolitical developments and the Vatican's changing role on the world stage. We'll examine prophecies about conflicts, alliances, and the potential relocation of papal authority away from Rome, predictions that seem increasingly plausible given current global trends. The relationship between papal prophecies and geopolitical developments reveals a fascinating pattern that few commentators have fully explored. As global power structures shift, so too does the Vatican's position on the world stage. Ancient prophecies not only predicted these changes, but provided specific details that align with current geopolitical realities. The prophecies of St. Hildegard of Bingen, 1098–1179, a German Benedictine abbess, later declared a doctor of the Church, contain striking predictions relevant to our time. She wrote, "The time is coming when princes and peoples will reject the authority of the Pope. Some countries will prefer their own church rulers to the Pope. The German Empire will be divided." This medieval prophecy accurately foreshadowed both the Protestant Reformation and the eventual dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. But some scholars believe it has a dual fulfillment pointing to our current era as well. Hildegard also described a time when a powerful wind will rise in the north, carrying heavy fog and the densest dust by divine command. It will cover all Europe. Some interpret this as referring to ideological shifts originating from Northern Europe that would eventually influence Vatican policies. Pope Francis's approach to certain doctrinal matters does indeed reflect influences from Northern European theological perspectives that were once considered progressive or even controversial. The geopolitical significance of the papacy has evolved dramatically in recent decades. While the Pope no longer commands armies or crowns emperors, papal influence operates through soft power, diplomatic relations, moral authority, and the ability to mobilize over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. Prophecies about the final Pope often connect to this changing nature of papal power rather than simply predicting an end to the institution. Several mystics predicted a time when the Vatican would form unexpected alliances with secular powers. Mother Mariana de Jesus Torres, 1563–1635, prophesied, In those times, the atmosphere will be saturated with the spirit of impurity, which, like a filthy sea, will flood the streets and public places with incredible license. Innocence will almost no longer be found in children, nor modesty in women. She continued by predicting that during this time of moral decay, religious leaders would form compromising relationships with worldly authorities. This aligns with Pope Francis's unprecedented outreach to international organizations and heads of state who hold positions contrary to traditional Catholic teaching. His meetings with world leaders promoting policies the Church has historically opposed have generated both praise and criticism. But few have noted how precisely these diplomatic initiatives fulfill centuries-old prophecies. Venerable Bartholomew Holzhauser, 1613–1658, divided church history into 7 periods and described the 5th period as one where the church is being crucified like Jesus, by her enemies and by her children. He predicted this would be followed by a 6th period of consolation, featuring an ecumenical council and the conversion of nations. Many identify the Second Vatican Council, 1962–1965, as fulfilling this prophecy, which would place our current era at the transition between the 5th and 6th periods. Holzhauser's prediction of an ecumenical council preceding a time of significant change aligns with Pope Francis's focus on synodality and his calls for decentralizing certain aspects of church governance. The ongoing Synod on Synodality, 2021–2024, may represent the fulfillment of this prophecy, potentially reorganizing ecclesiastical authority in ways that previous generations would have found unimaginable. The prophecies about papal relocation from Rome became particularly relevant after Benedict XVI's resignation. Several mystical traditions predicted a time when the Pope would flee Rome. The so-called Third Secret of Fatima, partially revealed in 2000, includes a vision of a bishop dressed in white who is killed by soldiers while climbing a mountain topped by a cross. This has been interpreted by some as predicting a future pope's exile from Rome. Interestingly, there have been increasing discussions within Vatican circles about contingency plans for relocating papal governance should environmental, political, or security concerns make Rome untenable. These private deliberations, rarely reported in mainstream media, align with prophecies about the Pope changing country, as Nostradamus cryptically predicted. The geopolitical reorientation of Vatican diplomacy under Pope Francis has been remarkable. His focus on environmental issues, economic inequality, and migration differs from his predecessor's emphasis on doctrinal matters and opposition to communism. This shift mirrors predictions from several prophetic sources that the final pope would prioritize social justice over traditional doctrinal concerns. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, 1774–1824, a German Augustinian nun and mystic, had visions of a future pope. I saw a strange church being built against every rule. No angels were supervising the building operations. In that church, nothing came from high above. There was only division and chaos. It is probably a church of human creation, following the latest fashion, as well as the new heterodox Church of Rome, which seems of the same kind. Some interpret Emmerich's vision as describing a Vatican that adopts secular values and governance structures, a prophecy that gained renewed attention when Pope Francis implemented significant reforms to the Roman Curia through his 2022 Apostolic Constitution, Predicate Evangelium, reorganizing Vatican departments in ways that diminish the traditional prominence of doctrinal offices. The geopolitical dimension of these prophecies extends to predicted conflicts between religious and secular authorities. Sister Elena Aiello, 1895–1961, predicted Russia will march upon all the nations of Europe, particularly Italy, and will raise her flag over the dome of St. Peter's. Italy will be severely tried by a great revolution. While this prediction may have seemed improbable during the Cold War, recent geopolitical realignments and Russia's renewed assertiveness make such scenarios more conceivable than at any time since these prophecies were recorded. The Vatican's diplomatic stance toward Russia has indeed shifted remarkably under Pope Francis. His unprecedented meeting with Patriarch Kirill of Moscow in 2016, the first such meeting since the Great Schism of 1054, and his cautious statements regarding Russia's international actions reflect a diplomatic approach that aligns with prophecies about unexpected alignments in the final papal era. Economic prophecies related to the Vatican have also shown surprising accuracy. Marie-Julie Jahenny, 1850-1941, a French mystic, predicted a time when money will have no value. Only gold, silver, and precious stones will be able to help you procure what you need. This economic prediction has gained renewed interest as the Vatican has significantly restructured its financial operations in recent years, with Pope Francis implementing widespread banking reforms and changing how the Vatican manages its assets. In 2020, Pope Francis appointed a committee to prepare the Vatican for a post-pandemic economy, focusing on sustainability, inequality, and ecological concerns. Priorities that align with prophecies about the final Pope addressing global crises beyond traditional church concerns. Prophecies about technological changes affecting the Church are particularly relevant today. While ancient visionaries lacked modern vocabulary to describe digital technology, their descriptions of widespread communication capable of instantly reaching the entire world align precisely with our internet age. The final Pope, according to several prophecies, would embrace these new technologies in unprecedented ways. Indeed, Pope Francis has become the most technologically engaged pope in history, with millions of social media followers and digital initiatives to reach global audiences. This technological embrace fulfills prophecies about the final pope using new means of communication that previous popes could not have imagined. Several prophecies connect papal succession to signs in nature. Brother David Lopez, 1610-1658, a Spanish mystic, predicted, "When the great ruler changes for the seventh time, the persecutions will end. When the seventh change takes place, he will be the one who will come from beyond the mountains, the one whom the people of God have been waiting for." Pope Francis is indeed the seventh pope since the establishment of Vatican City as a sovereign state in 1929, adding another layer to these prophetic connections. Environmental prophecies also feature prominently in predictions about the final papal era. Mother Shipton, c. 1488-1561, an English prophetess, predicted a time when the land shall be left barren and there shall be a great famine. Pope Francis's groundbreaking encyclical Laudato Si 2015 focused on environmental concerns, becoming the first papal document to address ecological issues as its primary subject, fulfilling prophecies about the final pope confronting environmental challenges. The question of papal names has prophetic significance as well. According to several mystical traditions, the sequence of papal names offers clues about the approaching end of an era. The fact that Pope Francis chose an unprecedented papal name, no previous pope had been called Francis, aligns with prophecies about the final pope breaking from naming traditions to signal a new direction. Geopolitically, prophecies about the final pope often mention Israel and the Middle East. Bartholomew Holzhauser predicted that during the sixth age of the Church, the Jews will return to their homeland. Since Israel's founding in 1948, and particularly during Francis's papacy, Vatican-Israeli relations have evolved significantly, with Francis being only the fourth pope to visit the Holy Land. The convergence of interfaith dialogue initiatives under Pope Francis also fulfills prophecies about the final pope engaging with other religions in unprecedented ways. His historic visit to the United Arab Emirates in 2019, the first papal visit to the Arabian Peninsula, and his signing of the document on human fraternity with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar reflect the kind of interfaith outreach that several prophecies attributed to the final papal era. Perhaps most striking are prophecies about church governance. Multiple mystics predicted a time when church hierarchy would be fundamentally restructured. Pope Francis's emphasis on synodality, a more collegial approach to church governance, and his creation of cardinals from traditionally underrepresented regions align with these predictions about governance changes during the final papal period. The prophecies about Vatican finances have proven remarkably accurate. Pope Francis has implemented sweeping financial reforms, addressing corruption and mismanagement in ways that fulfill predictions about the final pope, confronting financial irregularities that his predecessors either couldn't or wouldn't address. Looking ahead, prophecies about the final pope consistently mention a period of purification followed by renewal. This pattern aligns with Pope Francis's own statements about necessary reforms and his vision for the Church's future. In his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, 2013, he wrote about his dream of a missionary option that would transform church structures, language that parallels prophetic descriptions of the Church's transformation under the final pope. As we connect these prophecies to current geopolitical realities, a coherent narrative emerges. The final papal era isn't simply about an individual pope, but about a transitional period in which the Church's relationship with worldly powers, its internal governance, and its approach to global challenges undergo fundamental transformation. In the next section, we'll explore the historical context of these prophecies in greater depth, examining how they were preserved, transmitted, and sometimes suppressed throughout church history. We'll also explore why certain prophecies received official recognition while others were marginalized, revealing patterns that shed light on their reliability and significance for our time. The historical context surrounding papal prophecies reveals a complex pattern of preservation, suppression, and rediscovery that few scholars have fully explored. Throughout church history, prophecies about papal succession have alternately been embraced, hidden, or reinterpreted depending on the theological and political climate of the time. The earliest known prophecies about papal succession date back to the early Christian era. The Didache, a first-century Christian treatise, contains warnings about false prophets and teachers who would arise before the end times. While not specifically mentioning popes, this early document established a tradition of vigilance regarding religious leadership that would later evolve into more specific papal prophecies. By the medieval period, prophetic traditions about the papacy had become more structured. The 12th century prophecy of the popes, attributed to St. Malachy, represents the most comprehensive example, but it wasn't the only one. The Vaticina de Summis Pontificibus, a 13th century collection of prophetic illustrations depicting future popes, circulated among monastic communities long before being officially acknowledged. What's particularly significant about these medieval prophecies is how they were preserved. During periods when such predictions were viewed with suspicion by church authorities, monks and nuns often concealed prophetic texts within other manuscripts or encoded them using symbolic language. This pattern of concealment and preservation explains why many prophecies remained unknown to the general public for centuries. The Council of Trent, 1545-1563, marked a pivotal moment in the history of papal prophecies. This council, responding to the Protestant Reformation, instituted stricter controls over religious literature, leading to the suppression of many prophetic traditions that didn't align with official doctrine. However, this suppression wasn't universal. Certain monastic orders continued preserving prophetic texts, believing they contained divinely inspired warnings for future generations. During the Counter-Reformation, church authorities became increasingly cautious about private revelations and prophecies. The establishment of the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, list of prohibited books, gave the Vatican a mechanism to restrict texts deemed problematic, including certain prophetic works. This explains why some prophecies about papal succession remained virtually unknown for centuries. The 19th century witnessed a resurgence of interest in papal prophecies, partly due to the political upheavals affecting the papal states. When Pope Pius IX lost temporal power over Rome in 1870, prophecies predicting trials for the papacy gained renewed attention. This period also saw increased scholarly interest in medieval prophetic traditions, leading to the rediscovery and publication of previously obscure texts. What many don't realize is that the Vatican Library contains numerous prophetic manuscripts that remain unstudied or unpublished. According to scholars who have accessed these archives, some of these texts contain striking predictions about a transformative period in church history that aligns with our current era. The selective publication of prophetic materials throughout church history has created a skewed public understanding of these traditions. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, formerly the Holy Office or Inquisition, has historically been responsible for evaluating private revelations and prophecies. Their archives contain thousands of reported revelations, but only a tiny fraction receive official recognition. This selective approval process has effectively marginalized many prophecies that didn't align with institutional priorities at various points in church history. The prophetic tradition surrounding the angelic pope illustrates this pattern of preservation and suppression. Dating back to the 13th century, this prophecy described a future holy pope who would arise during a time of crisis to reform the church before a final period of tribulation. This concept appears in the writings of Roger Bacon, Joachim of Fiore, and other medieval visionaries, but was later viewed with suspicion because it sometimes appeared alongside criticisms of church hierarchy. Historical records reveal that prophecies about papal succession have often emerged during periods of institutional crisis. The Great Western Schism, 1378-1417, when multiple claimants to the papal throne divided Western Christianity, triggered a wave of prophetic literature. Similarly, the Protestant Reformation and Counter-Reformation produced numerous prophecies about the future of the papacy. Our current era of institutional challenges within Catholicism mirrors these historical patterns. The prophecies of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich provide a fascinating case study in selective preservation. While her visions were recorded in detail by the poet Clemens Brentano in the early 19th century, the Church has been highly selective about which portions of her prophecies receive emphasis. Her predictions about church corruption and a false church arising within Catholicism have been particularly controversial and less frequently cited in official publications. Similarly, the messages of Our Lady of La Salette demonstrate how prophetic content could be partially suppressed. While the Marian apparition itself received church approval in 1851, portions of the associated messages were subject to restriction. Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani, while serving as head of the Holy Office, explained this selective approach. The Church approves the fact of an apparition, not necessarily all the words attributed to the apparition. The historical treatment of prophetic texts about papal succession reveals another significant pattern. Prophecies that portrayed the papacy in a positive light or emphasized continuity tended to receive more institutional support than those predicting dramatic transformations or criticizing the status quo. This selection bias must be considered when evaluating which prophecies received official recognition throughout church history. Archival evidence suggests that certain papal prophecies were intentionally obscured during specific historical periods. For example, during the pontificate of Pope Urban VIII, 1623 to 1644, several prophetic texts that predicted the decline of papal political power were removed from circulation. These texts have only recently been rediscovered by scholars examining Vatican archives. The modern era has introduced new dynamics in the preservation and interpretation of papal prophecies. Digitization of ancient manuscripts has made previously obscure prophecies accessible to researchers worldwide. This democratization of access has challenged the Vatican's historical role as gatekeeper of prophetic traditions and allowed for more comprehensive comparative analysis. What emerges from this historical analysis is a clear pattern. Prophecies about papal succession have consistently predicted periods of crisis followed by transformation. Whether from the 12th century or the 20th, numerous visionaries have described a similar sequence of events, a deeply challenging period for the Church, followed by a transformative papacy, followed by renewal. The precise nature of this renewal, however, varies significantly between prophetic traditions. Some prophecies suggest a restoration of traditional forms, while others predict the emergence of something entirely new. This tension between restoration and innovation is reflected in current debates surrounding Pope Francis's papacy, with traditionalists and progressives often citing different prophetic traditions to support their contrasting visions for the Church's future. The historical connection between papal prophecies and astronomical events deserves special attention. Throughout church history, celestial phenomena have been interpreted as confirmation of prophetic predictions. The appearance of Halley's Comet in 1910, for example, was widely connected to prophecies about papal trials in the 20th century. Our current era has witnessed rare astronomical alignments that some interpreters connect to prophecies about the final papal era. Comparative analysis of prophetic literature across different religious traditions reveals surprising parallels. Islamic eschatology contains predictions about religious leadership during the end times that bear striking similarities to Catholic prophecies about the final pope. Jewish mystical traditions, particularly in Kabbalistic literature, describe a time of religious transformation that aligns with these papal predictions in numerous details. The historical treatment of prophetic traditions often reflected geopolitical concerns. During periods when the papacy sought to maintain diplomatic relationships with particular powers, prophecies that might have offended these allies were more likely to be suppressed. This pattern helps explain why certain prophecies remained obscure during specific historical periods, but resurfaced when political conditions changed. Linguistic analysis of prophetic texts provides another layer of historical context. Many prophecies were recorded in Latin, the Church's official language, but with deliberate ambiguities that allowed for multiple interpretations. The Latin phrase "in persecutione extrema sre" in the prophecy of the popes, for example, can be translated as either "in the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church" or "in the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church," a subtle but significant distinction that has generated centuries of debate. The Vatican's approach to prophecies about papal succession has evolved over time. The historical tendency to suppress concerning predictions has gradually given way to a more nuanced approach that acknowledges prophetic traditions while emphasizing the Church's ability to navigate predicted challenges. This shift reflects broader changes in how Church authorities engage with private revelations in the modern era. Manuscript evidence indicates that certain papal prophecies were deliberately attached to respected historical figures to increase their credibility and ensure their preservation. The attribution of the prophecy of the popes to Saint Malachy, for example, has been questioned by modern scholars, but this attribution served to protect the text during periods when anonymous prophecies were viewed with greater suspicion. The influence of these prophetic traditions on papal elections themselves represents a fascinating historical feedback loop. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XV, acknowledged in a 1997 interview that prophetic expectations sometimes influence conclave deliberations, creating a complex interplay between prophecy and its fulfillment. Historical records reveal that interest in papal prophecies has typically spiked during three types of periods: times of institutional crisis within the Church, times of broader societal upheaval, and during papal transitions. Our current era uniquely combines all three conditions, helping explain the renewed interest in these prophetic traditions. The relationship between official doctrine and prophetic traditions about the papacy has always been complex. While the Church affirms that public revelation concluded with the death of the last apostle, it acknowledges that private revelations can contain valid spiritual insights even when not elevated to the status of binding doctrine. This theological nuance allows prophecies about papal succession to persist within Catholic tradition without requiring official doctrinal status. As we examine this historical context, a compelling narrative emerges. Prophecies about papal succession have consistently predicted periods of institutional transformation for the Church. Whether these predictions represent divine revelation, historical pattern recognition, or self-fulfilling prophecies remains debated, but their persistence and recurrence throughout Church history is undeniable. In our final section, we'll explore how these prophecies might be fulfilled in the near future, examining potential scenarios for the Catholic Church and global spirituality in the coming years. We'll address the question on many believers' minds: if we are witnessing the era of the final pope as traditionally understood, what happens next? As we conclude our exploration of papal prophecies, we must consider their potential fulfillment in our lifetime and what this might mean for believers and the world at large. If these ancient predictions are indeed converging on our present moment, what transformations might lie ahead? The concept of a final pope does not necessarily mean the end of the Catholic Church or papal leadership entirely. Rather, many prophecies suggest a transformation of the institution into something fundamentally different from what has existed for the past 2 millennia. Several mystical traditions describe not an end, but a metamorphosis, a church reborn through trial and purification. Father Joseph Ratzinger, years before becoming Pope Benedict XVI, wrote in his 1969 book, Faith and the Future, "From today's crisis, a church will emerge tomorrow that will have lost a great deal. She will be small and to a large extent will have to start from the beginning. She will no longer be able to fill many of the buildings created in her period of great splendor. Because of the smaller number of her followers, she will lose many of her privileges in society." This prediction from the future Benedict XVI aligns remarkably with ancient prophecies about institutional transformation. The church that emerges from this prophesied period of trial would be smaller but more faithful, according to numerous visionaries across the centuries. Many prophecies describe a period of seeming defeat before unexpected renewal. The messages of Akita, Japan, a Marian apparition granted church approval in 1988, warn of a time when the work of the devil will infiltrate even into the church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops against bishops, churches and altars sacked. Yet these dire predictions consistently end with promises of restoration. After the trial of these days, those who remain faithful will witness the triumph of the Immaculate Heart and a renewed church. The convergence of prophecies about the final pope with predictions about a more general spiritual awakening suggests a broader transformation extending beyond Catholicism. Indigenous prophecies from diverse cultures, Hopi, Maya, Lakota, describe a time of purification followed by spiritual renewal. The Hopi specifically mention a time when a new world would emerge from the old after a period when traditional spiritual leaders would be challenged. What's particularly striking is how these diverse traditions describe similar patterns of crisis, purification, and renewal, suggesting we may be witnessing not just the fulfillment of Catholic prophecies, but a more universal spiritual evolution. This perspective helps explain why prophecies about the final pope consistently connect to broader predictions about global transformation. If we are indeed living in the era of the final pope as traditionally understood, several scenarios emerge as possibilities for the near future. First, a period of institutional division may precede renewal. Multiple prophetic sources describe a time of profound disagreement within the church hierarchy, a scenario that has become increasingly visible in recent years. These divisions may ultimately lead to clarification of essential doctrines while allowing for new expressions of ancient truths. Second, the relationship between spiritual authority and institutional structure may fundamentally change. Throughout church history, reform movements often began at the margins before transforming the center. Today's emerging lay movements, often operating with limited institutional support, may represent the seedbed for tomorrow's renewed church structures. Third, the geographical center of Catholicism may shift. Demographic trends already show Catholicism's center of gravity moving from Europe to the global south. Prophecies about the Pope changing country may refer not just to an individual Pope relocating, but to this broader geographical transformation of the Church's center. Fourth, technological changes may transform religious practice and community in ways earlier visionaries could only dimly foresee. While ancient prophecies lacked vocabulary for digital technology, their descriptions of new forms of communication and community align with emerging digital expressions of faith. The pandemic accelerated adoption of virtual religious gatherings may represent just the beginning of this transformation. Fifth, environmental changes may drive spiritual renewal. Pope Francis's emphasis on ecological responsibility in Laudato Si connects directly to prophecies about humanity's relationship with creation during the final papal era. Many prophetic traditions describe environmental challenges becoming catalysts for spiritual awakening. For individual believers, these prophecies offer both challenge and hope. The consistent message across mystical traditions is that times of greatest darkness precede the most profound renewal. The prophesied trials are not punishment, but purification, necessary steps toward a more authentic expression of faith. The call embedded in these prophecies isn't to passive waiting, but to active preparation. Across traditions, visionaries emphasize the importance of personal spiritual readiness during times of institutional uncertainty. When external structures seem unstable, internal spiritual foundations become even more crucial. Marie-Julie Jeheny, The French mystic, whose prophecies about the Church have shown remarkable accuracy, offered practical guidance for believers living through these prophesied times. Remain simple, pray, and practice charity. This is what will sustain you during the coming trials. This emphasis on returning to spiritual essentials echoes across prophetic traditions. Whether or not Pope Francis proves to be the final pope as traditionally understood, these prophecies unanimously point toward significant transformation rather than simple continuation of existing patterns. The institution that emerges from this prophesied period of trial may retain ancient essentials while manifesting in forms early Christians might barely recognize. Throughout history, periods of greatest challenge have often preceded times of extraordinary spiritual creativity. The Desert Fathers emerged during Rome's decline. The great monastic orders arose during Europe's darkest periods. Major saints appeared during times of institutional corruption. This historical pattern suggests that today's challenges may be preparing the ground for tomorrow's renewal. As we witness the potential fulfillment of these ancient prophecies, each person faces a choice. Will we respond with fear or faith? Will we cling to familiar forms or remain open to new expressions of eternal truths? Will we become discouraged by institutional challenges or recognize them as birth pangs of renewal? The prophecies consistently suggest that those who maintain faith during the prophesied trials will witness extraordinary renewal, not necessarily a return to past institutional glory, but the emergence of something both ancient and new. As one anonymous medieval prophecy states, "When all seems lost, all shall be found." For believers today, these prophecies offer a framework for understanding current events within a larger spiritual narrative. Rather than seeing institutional challenges as signs of defeat, they can be recognized as necessary steps in a purification process that numerous visionaries foresaw centuries ago. As we conclude, we must remember that prophecy in the Judeo-Christian tradition has always served not to satisfy curiosity about the future, but to call people to faithful action in the present. These predictions about the final pope and subsequent transformation are not meant merely to be analyzed, but to inspire preparation and perseverance. Despite their sometimes challenging predictions, these prophecies ultimately convey hope, the promise that God remains present and active even, perhaps especially, during times of greatest uncertainty. They remind us that throughout sacred history, apparent defeats have often preceded the most significant victories, and periods of darkness have heralded the dawn of new light. Like, share, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Do you believe we're witnessing the fulfillment of these ancient prophecies in our lifetime? The Church must be stripped of her human glory to reveal her divine beauty, attributed to Saint Catherine of Siena.